Blood stained the antique Persian rug, gleaming dark under the shattered remains of a crystal decanter. That was the standard welcome at the Romano estate. Lorenzo Romano was a monster, wrapped in a tailored suit, terrorizing New York's underworld. No one dared cross him until a heavy-set maid with zero survival instincts walked straight into his crosshairs. The Romano estate on Long Island was less of a home and more of a heavily fortified fortress. Behind its towering wrought-iron gates and manicured hedges lay a world governed by blood loyalty and the absolute terrifying authority of Lorenzo Romano. At 34, Lorenzo was the undisputed head of the Romano crime syndicate. He was a man chiseled from marble and ice, possessing a temper so notoriously violent that his own capos hesitated to bring him bad news. Over the past 3 months, the estate had burned through 12 different maids. Some quit in tears, others fled in the dead of night, leaving their meager belongings behind, just to escape the suffocating tension of the house. Then came Penelope Gallagher. Penelope was 28, severely overweight and completely devoid of the nervous, fluttering energy that usually characterized the estate's domestic staff. She was a big woman, soft and round, in a world that demanded everyone be sharp and lethal. Her uniform strained slightly at the seams, her sensible black shoes carrying a heavy, deliberate tread. Life had never afforded Penelope the luxury of being delicate. Raising a financially reckless younger brother and juggling 3 minimum-wage jobs just to keep the heat on in her cramped Brooklyn apartment had forged a core of absolute iron beneath her soft exterior. When the desperate head housekeeper, Mrs. Higgins, offered her triple the standard hourly rate to clean the Don's private wing, Penelope didn't hesitate. She didn't care if Lorenzo Romano was the devil himself. The devil's money paid off overdue utility bills. Her 3rd day on the job coincided with one of the worst crises the Romano family had faced in a decade. A vital shipment at the Brooklyn docks had been intercepted by the rival Capello family, a catastrophic loss orchestrated by Vincent the Viper Capello. The sprawling mansion was practically vibrating with Lorenzo's wrath. Armed guards, usually stoic, were pacing the hallways with white knuckles. From the heavy oak doors of the master study, the sound of breaking glass and vicious roaring echoed through the corridor. "Get out!" Lorenzo's voice was a guttural snarl that rattled the expensive oil paintings on the walls. "If Frankie Marino doesn't have his head on my desk by midnight, I'll take yours." 3 burly mobsters men who had killed without blinking scrambled out of the study, looking pale and thoroughly chastised. They nearly collided with Penelope, who was pushing a heavy wooden cleaning cart down the hall. "Are you crazy, sweetheart?" One of the mobsters, a heavily tattooed enforcer named Dominic, hissed at her. "Turn the cart around. The boss is tearing the room apart. He'll snap your neck just for breathing too loud." Penelope looked at the terrified man, her round face impassive. "Is he done breaking things?" Dominic stared at her as if she had lost her mind. "What?" "If he's done breaking things, I need to sweep," Penelope said simply, her voice low and even. "I go off the clock in 20 minutes and Mrs. Higgins wants the study pristine." Without waiting for a response, Penelope gripped her heavy-duty broom and dustpan bypassed the bewildered mobsters and pushed open the heavy oak doors. The study was a disaster zone. Papers were scattered like snow across the mahogany floors. A shattered vase lay in ruins by the fireplace, and the scent of spilled whiskey was overpowering. In the center of the chaos stood Lorenzo Romano. He was breathing heavily, his tie discarded the top buttons of his crisp white shirt, ripped open to reveal a dark smattering of chest hair and the edge of a jagged scar. His dark eyes, practically black with fury, snapped toward the doorway. For a terrifying second, silence descended on the room. Lorenzo stared at the heavy-set woman in the doorway, expecting her to squeak, apologize, and run like all the others. Penelope didn't run. She didn't even gasp. She took in the mess, let out a long, exhausted sigh that spoke volumes of her weariness with the world, and walked right in. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Lorenzo growled, taking a predatory step toward her. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble meant to paralyze. "My job," Penelope replied smoothly, not making eye contact. She walked over to the fireplace, her heavy steps grounded and steady. She set down her dustpan and began sweeping up the shattered porcelain. Lorenzo was so stunned by the sheer audacity of her indifference that his rage stalled in his throat. He stalked toward her, towering over her crouching form. "I didn't call for a maid. Get out before I make you regret walking in here." Penelope paused. She slowly straightened up her joints, popping slightly. She was a large woman, and when she stood up to her full height, she took up her own space. She didn't shrink away from his towering, intimidating frame. She looked him dead in the eye. "Mr. Romano," she said, her tone reminiscent of a tired mother dealing with a tantrum-throwing toddler. "You have broken glass all over an antique rug. If you walk on it, you'll grind the shards into the fibers, and I will have to spend 3 hours on my knees with tweezers trying to get them out. I am not doing that. So kindly step to the left, so I can finish sweeping." Lorenzo blinked. For the first time in his reign as the head of the Romano family, someone had told him what to do. Not only that, but it was a maid. A fat, utterly unremarkable maid, who looked at him, not with terror, but with mild, bureaucratic annoyance. He took a step to his left. Penelope nodded once. "Thank you." She went back to sweeping. Lorenzo stood in the middle of his wrecked study, the roaring fire of his anger abruptly smothered by a profound sense of confusion. He watched her work. There was no trembling in her hands. Her breathing was steady. She moved with a slow, methodical rhythm, unbothered by the fact that she was sharing oxygen with a man who had ordered 2 executions before breakfast. When she finished, she dumped the glass into the trash, picked up a damp cloth, and moved to wipe the whiskey off his desk. "You aren't afraid of me," Lorenzo stated. It wasn't a question. Penelope paused, wiping the dark wood. "Should I be? I could kill you right now, and no one would ever find your body," he said, testing her, leaning his hands flat on the desk, bringing his face dangerously close to hers. Penelope didn't flinch. She just looked at the wet cloth in her hand, then back up to his dark, piercing eyes. "With all due respect, Mr. Romano, I ride the subway through East New York at 2 in the morning. I've had a gun pulled on me for a $20 bill. You're just a guy who broke his own vase because he was having a bad day. Now please lift your arms. You're leaning in the whiskey." Lorenzo stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. Then slowly, a low, dark chuckle rumbled in his chest. It grew into a genuine barking laugh that echoed strangely in the tense room. He lifted his arms. "What's your name?" he asked, watching her with a newfound intense curiosity. "Penelope." "Well, Penelope," Lorenzo murmured, his eyes tracking her as she cleaned. "You're the first interesting thing to happen in this house in a very long time." Over the next 4 weeks, a bizarre and unspoken dynamic settled over the Romano estate. Penelope Gallagher became the untouchable anomaly. She was the only staff member permitted to enter Lorenzo's study unannounced. When Lorenzo was locked in grueling meetings with his capos, screaming over territory disputes and money laundering operations, Penelope would calmly push her cart into the room, dust the bookshelves, swap out his cold espresso for a hot one, and leave. Her presence, heavy and grounding, acted as a bizarre anchor for the volatile Mafia Boss. He never yelled when she was in the room, but not everyone was amused by the Don's new favorite pet. Victor Rossi Lorenzo's second-in-command despised Penelope. Victor was a vain, sharply dressed man with ruthless ambition and a cruel streak. He didn't understand why Lorenzo tolerated this large, quiet woman who moved around their high-stakes criminal enterprise like she was invisible. "I don't get it, boss," Victor sneered one afternoon in the billiards room, chalking his cue stick. "Why do you keep the whale around? She waddles in, gets in the way. There are plenty of girls who look a lot better in a uniform who know how to keep their mouths shut." Lorenzo, who was lining up a shot, froze. The atmosphere in the room instantly plummeted to freezing. Lorenzo slowly straightened up, placing his cue stick on the green felt. He walked over to Victor, his face terrifyingly blank. Before Victor could react, Lorenzo's hand shot out, grabbing Victor by the throat and slamming him against the wood-paneled wall. "You will speak of Penelope with respect," Lorenzo whispered, his voice dripping with lethal promise. "She has more courage in her pinky finger than you have in your entire miserable body. If I ever hear you disrespect her again, Victor, I will cut your tongue out and feed it to my dogs. Do we understand each other?" Victor, choking and wide-eyed, nodded frantically. Lorenzo dropped him, adjusted his cuffs and walked out. But Victor's humiliation bred a dangerous, festering hatred. If he couldn't openly target the maid, he would find another way to use her. Victor had his own ambitions. He had been secretly funneling information to the Capello family, plotting a coup to take out Lorenzo and claim the Romano throne for himself. He needed Lorenzo dead, but the Don's security was impenetrable. Except for Penelope. Victor hired private investigators and quickly discovered Penelope's Achilles' heel, her younger brother, Liam. Liam Gallagher was a degenerate gambler who had recently racked up a $50,000 debt in an underground poker ring run by Victor's associates. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, while Penelope was carrying a stack of fresh linens toward the laundry room, Victor cornered her in a dimly lit service hallway. Two of his massive enforcers blocked the exits. "Hello, Penelope." Victor smiled, though his eyes were dead. Penelope gripped the linens tightly against her chest, her heart suddenly pounding. "Mr. Rossi, excuse me, I have work to do. I think we need to have a little chat about Liam." Victor said, his smile widening as he saw the blood drain from Penelope's face. He pulled a small, clear glass vial from his tailored jacket pocket. The liquid inside was completely colorless. "Liam owes my friends a lot of money. Money he doesn't have." Victor continued, stepping into her personal space. "They're going to break his legs tonight. Tomorrow they'll take his hands. But I can make all of that go away. I can clear his debt completely." Penelope swallowed hard, trying to maintain her imposing posture, but fear for her brother chilled her to the bone. "What do you want?" Victor pressed the small vial into her trembling, calloused hand. "The Don likes his espresso at precisely 4 o'clock. You're the one who makes it. Just empty this vial into his cup today. It's tasteless, odorless. He'll just go to sleep and his heart will stop. A natural tragedy." "No!" Penelope gasped, trying to shove the vial back. "I'm not a killer. I won't do it." Victor grabbed her wrist, his grip bruising. "You do it, or I make a phone call right now, and Liam goes to the bottom of the East River in a barrel. Your choice, sweetheart. The Mafia Boss who doesn't care about you or your baby brother's life." Victor let go of her, smoothed his lapels, and walked away, leaving Penelope alone in the dark hallway, staring in horror at the poison in her hand. At 3:55 p.m., Penelope stood in the massive, gleaming kitchen. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely hold the silver tray. On the tray sat a delicate porcelain cup filled with pitch-black espresso. In her apron pocket, the glass vial felt as heavy as an anvil. She closed her eyes, tears leaking down her plump cheeks. Liam was an idiot, a reckless fool, but he was her brother. He was the only family she had left in the world. But as she thought of Lorenzo, The terrifying, violent man who had never once mocked her size, who had demanded respect for her from his men, who looked at her as if she was actually worth seeing her stomach twisted into painful knots. At exactly 4 o'clock, Penelope knocked on the heavy oak doors of the study. "Come in," Lorenzo's voice called out. Penelope pushed the door open. Lorenzo was sitting behind his massive desk, rubbing his temples, looking exhausted. The moment he saw her, the hard lines around his mouth softened just a fraction. "Penelope," he said, sitting back in his leather chair. "Right on time." Penelope walked toward the desk. Her legs felt like lead. Every step was a battle. She reached the desk and set the silver tray down. Lorenzo reached for the espresso, but before his fingers could brush the porcelain, Penelope slapped her hand down over the cup. Lorenzo frowned, looking up at her in confusion. "What are you doing?" Penelope was breathing heavily, tears welling in her eyes, spilling over her lashes, and running down her face. She reached into her apron pocket, pulled out the clear glass vial, and slammed it down onto the mahogany desk, right next to the espresso. "Don't drink that!" she choked out, her voice breaking. Lorenzo looked at the vial, then at the espresso, and finally up at Penelope's tear-streaked face. His mafia instincts kicked in instantly. His posture went rigid, his eyes turning cold and calculating. "What is this, Penelope?" "It's poison!" she sobbed, burying her face in her hands, her large shoulders shaking with the force of her terror. "Victor Rossi cornered me in the hall. My brother, my stupid brother, owes $50,000 to gamblers. Victor said if I didn't put that in your espresso, they would kill Liam tonight. I couldn't do it. I'm so sorry I couldn't do it, but please, Mr. Romano, you can kill me, but please don't let them hurt my brother." Lorenzo sat perfectly still. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Penelope's desperate weeping. He looked at the poison, realizing just how close he had come to death. If it had been anyone else, any of his highly trained, heavily armed guards who had been bought off, he would be dead right now. But this woman, this terrified, heavy-set maid, who scrubbed his floors and had every reason to take the easy way out to save her own blood, had chosen loyalty. She had chosen him over her own brother's safety, knowing it might cost both of them their lives. Lorenzo slowly stood up. He walked around the desk. Penelope cringed, bracing herself for the blow, for the bullet, for the violent end to her tragic life. Instead, she felt 2 large, warm hands gently grip her trembling shoulders. "Look at me," Lorenzo commanded, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. Penelope forced herself to open her eyes. She looked up into Lorenzo's face. There was no anger there, only an intense, blazing fire of respect, and something much deeper, something protective that made her breath catch in her throat. "You saved my life," Lorenzo said quietly, his thumbs brushing against the fabric of her uniform. "And because of that, your brother's debts are gone. As of this second, Liam is under my protection. No one will ever touch him." Penelope let out a ragged gasp, a fresh wave of tears hitting her. "Thank you. Thank you." Lorenzo's expression hardened as he looked toward the closed door of the study. The beast inside him, the ruthless Don of the Romano family, was wide awake and hungry for blood. "Dry your tears, Penelope," Lorenzo whispered, his eyes locked on the door, his mind already spinning a web of brutal vengeance. "Stay here. Lock the door behind me. I have to go have a word with Victor." Penelope's trembling hands fumbled with the heavy brass lock, the metallic click echoing like a gunshot in the cavernous quiet study. She retreated to the far corner of the room, pressing her plump back against the cold mahogany bookshelves. Outside those double oak doors, a terrifying silence hung over the Romano estate for exactly 3 minutes. Then all hell broke loose. Lorenzo's footsteps were deliberately heavy against the marble floors of the main corridor. He did not run. He stalked. He found Victor Rossi in the grand foyer, holding a burner phone and whispering frantically to someone on the other end, likely coordinating the invasion he assumed was about to happen once the poison took effect. Victor looked up, expecting to see a panicked guard announcing the Don's sudden collapse. Instead, he saw Lorenzo very much alive, with eyes as dead and cold as a winter grave. "Boss," Victor stammered frantically, dropping the phone into his jacket pocket. "I thought you were taking your afternoon coffee." There was a slight change of plans. "Victor," Lorenzo said smoothly, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. From the shadows of the mezzanine, Lorenzo's loyal enforcers, Dominic and Luca, stepped in to view their weapons, already drawn and suppressed. Victor's bought men, realizing the coup had been compromised, reached for their holsters. The foyer erupted into a chaotic, deafening crossfire. Lorenzo did not flinch as a bullet shattered a crystal chandelier above him, raining glass down like diamonds. He moved with a terrifying, predatory grace, closing the distance between himself and his treacherous second-in-command. Victor fired wildly, his panic betraying his aim. Lorenzo disarmed him with a brutal strike to the wrist, the sickening crack of bone audible even over the gunfire. With a swift, merciless motion, Lorenzo drove Victor to his knees, pressing the barrel of his own weapon against Victor's forehead. "You underestimated my house, Victor," Lorenzo whispered harshly, the scent of gunpowder thick in the air. "You thought you could use Penelope. You thought her weight made her slow, that her background made her weak, but she possesses more loyalty in her blood than you could ever comprehend." "Lorenzo, please," Victor begged, blood dripping from his shattered nose. "Capello made me do it. Vincent Capello and Judge Anthony Carmichael. They threatened my family." "You chose your fate," Lorenzo replied, utterly devoid of mercy. He pulled the trigger, ending the rebellion instantly. Silence slammed back into the estate, heavy and suffocating. Lorenzo surveyed the foyer, stepping over the bodies of traitors. He wiped a smear of blood from his cheek, his breathing heavy, the beast inside him somewhat satiated by the purge. He left his men to handle the cleanup and walked back toward his study. Inside, Penelope was huddled on the floor, her arms wrapped around her large knees, weeping softly. When the lock clicked and the door swung open, she flinched violently. Lorenzo stepped into the room, his white shirt torn and splattered with dark crimson. "It's over," he announced softly, closing the door behind him. Penelope scrambled to her feet, her sensible shoes slipping slightly on the polished wood. She looked at the blood on his shirt, her maternal caretaking instincts overriding her paralyzing fear. "You're hurt," she breathed out, hurrying toward him. "It's not my blood," Lorenzo assured her, but he allowed her to guide him to the leather sofa. For the first time in his brutal, violent life, he surrendered to the care of another person. Penelope rushed to her cleaning cart, retrieving a clean white towel, and wetting it with a bottle of distilled water she used for the antique furniture. She knelt beside him, her soft, heavy form a grounding presence against his hardened, muscular physique. With surprisingly gentle hands, she wiped the blood and grime from his face and neck. Lorenzo watched her intensely. He noticed the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the soft curve of her double chin, the absolute lack of pretense in her movements. She wasn't trying to seduce him. She wasn't trying to manipulate him. She was simply caring for him. "Why didn't you run?" Lorenzo asked, suddenly, his voice a low rumble. "When Victor threatened your brother, you could have poisoned me, grabbed your brother, and fled the city. You had the opportunity." Penelope paused, the damp towel hovering over his jaw. She looked deeply into his dark eyes. "Because you are a terrifying man, Mr. Romano, but you have never been cruel to me." In a world that constantly tells me I take up too much space, you treated me like a human being. I couldn't repay that with murder." Lorenzo reached up his large hand, gently wrapping around her thick wrist. He pulled her slightly closer, his gaze dropping to her soft, trembling lips. "You are not just a maid anymore, Penelope. Do you understand me? You belong to me now. I will protect you. I will protect Liam and anyone who looks at you with anything less than absolute reverence will answer to me." 6 months later, the Romano estate had transformed, and so had its hierarchy. Penelope Gallagher was no longer pushing a heavy wooden cleaning cart, nor was she wearing a strained maid's uniform. She was the undisputed queen of the Romano syndicate. Lorenzo had made good on his promises. He had paid off Liam's debts and placed the young man in a strictly monitored legitimate administrative role at one of the family's shipping warehouses in Queens, ensuring Liam stayed far away from the poker tables. As for Penelope, Lorenzo worshipped her. He refused to let her change herself to fit the hollow, superficial mold of a typical mafia wife. When high society designers subtly suggested she wear slimming black or restrictive corsets, Lorenzo would throw them out of the house. Instead, he commissioned custom couture that celebrated her size. Penelope walked through the estate in flowing emerald green silk gowns that draped beautifully over her wide hips and heavy bust radiating a quiet, immovable power. She was fat, she was soft, and she was the most dangerous woman in New York, simply because Lorenzo Romano would burn the city to ashes if a single hair on her head was harmed. But Penelope was not just a protected trophy. She was remarkably brilliant. Her years of surviving on the poverty line, dodging debt collectors and stretching pennies, had given her an incredibly sharp mind for logistics and financial anomalies. She began quietly reviewing Lorenzo's legitimate business ledgers. The ultimate test of her new position came during a high-stakes sit-down with Vincent Capello, the rival boss who had orchestrated Victor's failed coup. The meeting took place in the private dining room of a heavily guarded Italian restaurant in Manhattan. Lorenzo sat at the head of the table, radiating lethal tension. Beside him sat Penelope, looking regal and unbothered, sipping sparkling water. Vincent Capello, a sleazy, arrogant man with a scarred face, smirked as he looked at Penelope. "I gotta admit, Lorenzo, when I heard you took a new woman, I expected a supermodel, not the kitchen staff. What are you paying her in pastries?" The Romano guards in the room instantly drew their weapons, the sound of safeties clicking off filling the room. Lorenzo's eyes turned murderous, his hand reaching for the heavy pistol inside his jacket. But Penelope placed a soft, plump hand over Lorenzo's forearm, stopping him. She didn't blush. She didn't cry. She simply smiled a chilling, terrifying smile that she had learned directly from the Don himself. "Mr. Capello." Penelope said, her voice smooth and conversational. "I might enjoy a good pastry, but you seem to enjoy embezzling from your own offshore accounts, specifically the Shell Corporation in the Cayman Islands, under your mistress's maiden name. I found it quite interesting that your capos are taking pay cuts while you quietly funnel $3 million a quarter into a private fund." Vincent's smug grin vanished instantly. The color drained from his face as his own men standing behind him exchanged dark, suspicious glances. "You're lying," Vincent spat, though sweat was beading on his forehead. Penelope casually slid a thick manila folder across the polished table. "Bank statements, wire transfer logs, and photographs. You see, Vincent, when you spend your whole life being ignored by people because of how you look, you learn how to watch them very closely. You should really secure your digital servers. Now Lorenzo and I are going to propose a new territory division, and you are going to sign it, or I will hand these files to your underboss and let your own men tear you apart." Vincent stared at the files, utterly defeated, by a woman he had dismissed seconds ago. He picked up his pen and signed the territory over without another word. Later that night, back in the safety of their master suite at the estate, Lorenzo stood by the roaring fireplace, pouring 2 glasses of expensive red wine. He walked over to where Penelope was sitting on the edge of their massive bed, her silk robe pooling elegantly around her large, soft thighs. He handed her a glass, then sank to his knees before her, a position of absolute submission that the feared Don Romano took for no one else on earth. He rested his hands on her waist, looking up at her with a mixture of awe and burning, consuming love. "You were magnificent today," Lorenzo murmured, kissing the soft skin of her stomach. "You terrified them." Penelope smiled, running her fingers through his dark, thick hair. "I learned from the best. I told you I'm not afraid of monsters." "No." Lorenzo agreed, his dark eyes shining as he looked up at his beautiful heavy-set queen. "You just know exactly how to tame them." They had conquered the Underworld, not with standard cruelty, but with an unexpected alliance forged in the ashes of betrayal. Penelope had walked into a house of death, armed with nothing but a dustpan and an iron will, and she had claimed the heart of its king, proving that true power is an immovable force, no matter what shape it takes. Did you love this thrilling mafia romance? The world of Lorenzo and Penelope proves that true power and love come in unexpected forms. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more intense, dramatic stories.